Welcome back to Shaboom. I'm Rick K. Jones and proud to be both a father and a grandfather on this Father's Day week. For all you fathers out there, what's your plans for Sunday? Well, I'm pretty lucky. My wife, Charlotte, always cooks me fried chicken with creamed potatoes on Father's Day. And so Ryan and Celia, and more importantly, Levin, will come over to eat and swim. It's always a very fun day. This year, Celia's sister from Houston and her family will be visiting and staying in our guest house, so we're going to have a big crowd. I like to cook, and their visit will give me a lot of opportunities to cook while they're here. Our word for the week is influence. So a question for you is, who do you influence? As a parent and as a grandparent, I have had and still have great opportunities to influence my kids and my grandkids. I still get to influence my teammates and my clients. I do a lot of mentorships of both young people just starting their professional careers and some younger entrepreneurs who are building their own agencies or their other small businesses. I like to be able to influence them. I also have a lay leadership position in my church this year that creates a lot of opportunities for influence. And then I have this podcast and the podcast United Taste of America that I think influences a larger audience in a variety of ways. Here's some fun sayings about influence. The author Stephen King said, "We never know which lives we influence or when or why." I love that. Richie Norton said, "Influence does not require position," which is so true. It's not your title. It's your qualities in the way that you influence people. David Abrams said, "What we say has such a profound influence upon what we see and hear and taste of the world." Our playlist songs are not just about influence, but also songs that influence the world in so many ways. Our song of the week is the great Sam Cooke classic, "A Change Is Gonna Come." That became kind of the rallying song for the civil rights movement in the early 1960s. It's a song all about influence. Other songs on our playlist that influence the world are songs like Billie Holiday's "Strange Fruit," very controversial song of that time. It was about lynching in the South. It's a classic song by the great Billie Holiday. John Lennon had a wonderful song that most of us remember called "Imagine," that's all about influence. And then U2 had a great song called "Sunday Bloody Sunday" about what was going on between Protestants and Catholics in Ireland, especially in Northern Ireland. And in that time, there was a wonderful song about influence called "We Are the World." It was a song by Lionel Richie, Michael Jackson, Quincy Jones, and many others. That was a very, very important song during that period of time. It actually raised money for African relief. There was a big famine in Africa, and "We Are the World" was produced by Quincy Jones with all these artists giving their time. Sold several million copies and raised a lot of money. We've got Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On." We've got Stevie Wonder's classic song, "Living for the City." And finally, we have a song about being an influence as a parent. It's the great George Strait song, "It's Love Without End, Amen." Speaking of George Strait, I recently had a chance to go see George Strait at Clemson University. This turned out to be the largest audience he'd ever played in front of. 90,000 people showed up to hear George Strait. He played like 37 songs. Got played for 3 hours. He's 73 years old. He's a year older than me. He still sounds great. It was an amazing night. But as I was going to see George Strait, I realized something. This was my fifth time to see George in 5 different decades in 5 different cities. First saw him in San Antonio, Texas in the 80s. Then saw him again in the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s. And now here in 2026, I got to see him again. Pretty amazing from that standpoint. Great George Strait, great song, all about influence as a parent. Love without end, amen. by George Strait. My guest today is my pal, Bob Vecchione. Bob is the longtime executive director of NACDA. He's had great influence over a generation of leaders in college athletics. He retired not too long ago to spend more time with his grandkids, where he is again having great influence. Let's welcome Bob to Shibu. Hey, Bob, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rick. It's a pleasure.
Well, it's good to have you. I always ask every guest the same first question: where were you raised, and who were some of the most influential people early in your life?
Well, I was raised in Chicago, Illinois. The oldest in an Italian family, oldest son, oldest grandchild, and obviously grew up a typical Italian family. We had two kitchens in the house. We had, one upstairs, but everything really happened in the basement. We had a full kitchen in the basement with a bar and tables that sat 18 to 20 people, and, everything kind of focused around that. Um, I lived next door to my mom's grandparents. We saw my dad's grandparents every Sunday. So really growing up in that bubble of Italian American situation, and it was just I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.
Well, I have another podcast right now called United Taste of America, where we're telling the story of American cuisine, and it's really the story of
Hmm.
immigrants. Our culture, our history, our food, it's all about immigrants. And you think about the contributions that Italian Americans made to our society, to music, to art, but especially to food. It's pretty
Yeah,
incredible.
it really is. And we had all of that. I remember my great grandparents, my mom's father's mother, Grandma D'Amato. She didn't speak English. My dad's grandfather, Grandpa Vecchione, he didn't speak English. And I remember them. And those were the days when, the grandparents lived with the children. I mean, they didn't have a separate place back then. They came over from Italy and they all lived together. And some of the stories that transpired and just being old enough to remember them is really special and will go with me to my grave. And I try to impart some of those stories and some of those great philosophies to my children because I think it's important to carry on those traditions.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons that you retired, you know, at the right time, but younger than some people do, was that you realized you could have such great influence and impact on your grandchildren.
Right.
And I think that came from the fact that your grandparents, and in some cases, great grandparents, had such a great influence on you.
Right. We were, I don't think my mother ever forgave me because when I was living back in Chicago, getting married, 2 days after Mary and I got married, we moved to Seattle. So we were like the first ones in our family to leave the nest. And while it was great for Mary and I, and again, we do it 1,000 times over again. I know it was really, really difficult for my parents being away, but now fast forward 45 years later, it's really neat to be living near our children, our grandchildren. I mean, our daughter and her two children live 8 minutes away, and my son and his two children live 12 minutes away. So that's really, really special for us, and we look forward to every day being with them.
Well, before we talk about that, let's talk about kind of your career. What was your first job out of college?
First job out of college was well, I went, my uncle in Chicago worked for a masonry. He owned a masonry company. And so I was working with him and his partner was an Italian. He hired a bunch of Italian bricklayers who were really tremendous artists. No one spoke English. I worked with my uncle. I was the lowest person on the totem pole. Um, and I met a person who turned out to be a great mentor of mine. Jim Swantek, and he said, "Bob, you got to come work with us over at National Car Rental." So one of the toughest conversations I ever had was I had to tell my grandfather that I'm not going to be working with Uncle Mike anymore. And that was very difficult because my grandfather was, from the old school, from Italy, wasn't a man of a lot of words. And he says, "You got to learn the trade." I said, "Grandpa, I've been doing this for a year. My body's breaking down, and I'm going to work with this." And I said, "And trust me, I'll be successful." And I was.
Yeah, we met first when you were at National. I still have my original National number that I got from you that starts with a
Yep.
0. They don't even have that doesn't exist anymore. So every time I call in to reserve a car, I'll go, "Here's my number, but you have to drop the 0 to find me." And they go, "I've never seen a number this old." And I'm like, "Well, I'm old, and you can blame this guy named Bob Vecchione because you pioneered going to trade associations and getting them to join in mass." And obviously you did that with NACDA, which we'll get to in a minute, but you also did it with the NABC, the National Association of Basketball Coaches. And I was a member of the NABC, and I joined National. I mean, a gazillion years ago, and I have been a National customer ever since. So you had tremendous success
Yeah,
there.
when I worked for National, I was 23 years old. I was the youngest person. Every job I had, I was always the youngest person. And gentleman I worked for, Bob Canonical, part of my territory, he says, "Hey, I was listening to radio this morning, and the Big Ten is over in Schaumburg. Why don't you go call on Wayne Duke?" I said, "Okay." So I called the office and talked to the John Dewey was the number 2 man, and Eleanor Jessup was my contact. So I called and I went over, and second meeting, um, I'm sitting across from Wayne Duke, and I'm going, "Holy cow, this is really something." And Wayne took me to lunch and had the typical, 2 martini lunch, and it was wonderful. And I had a beer, but it really blossomed from there. Again, trying to be coachable, part of a team. Had a great success with the Big Ten, which then morphed into all the other conferences across the country. But it was all just that one idea sparked by our leader. And I just kind of did what I was told, trying to be coachable. And it just blossomed from there.
Well, you did a deal with NACDA and got to know Mike Clary. For those listeners out there that don't know the name Mike Clary, he's probably the most influential person in college sports that nobody's ever heard
Right.
of, except for those outside of the industry. Talk about his influence on you and his influence on college athletics.
Well, when I wanted to get big time into college marketing, and I was just the sales guy. I was living in San Francisco at the time, and I was asking around, and I said, "Who can I talk to who really knows college athletics?" And 2 names came up. One was Tim Simmons from Coors, and the other was Mike Cleary. So I called Mike Cleary, and Mike was wonderful. And anytime you called him, I don't care if you were a custodian in his parochial kids' grade school, or if you were, a governor of the state of Ohio, Mike would call you back that day. And I called Mike. He called me back. We ended up having breakfast at the Red Lion Hotel and at SeaTac Airport. And we sat down for about an hour, and we just got to know each other. I became a sponsor of NACDA's, and my first official function was at the Final Four in Lexington, Kentucky. And Mike was just one of these guys that was no nonsense, and he was Irish Catholic, and just loyal as ever. And he just was treated me like his 10th child. I was very blessed to fall under his tutelage.
Well, that Final Four in Lexington was the famous year that Villanova upset Georgetown in one of the classic games. And I remember going as a member of the NABC, and in that era, the the cities really appreciated the coaches being
Right.
there, and they really put on the dog for the coaches. And I remember one of the things they did was we had a party where we went to Red Mile to the harness racing track, and they played videos of former harness races, but they gave us all like $1,000 in play money, and you could bet on races, and then you won prizes at the end. I'll never forget. That was one of the great experiences. But that was one of the last years that the Final Four was in a real gym and not in a stadium. And it was a pretty special time. But then, yeah, obviously you develop this relationship with Mike, and you go to work for NACDA, and had a chance to be under his tutelage until you took over the organization several years ago. Talk a little bit about
Yeah,
that.
well, that was special. But going back to that Final Four real quick, that's where I really got to know Jim Host, who was and still is one of my mentors. And he had a big function that Thursday night. He always had a Thursday night function, and that was at Calumet Farms that year. And that's what led me to become an NCAA corporate partner, which obviously just mushroomed and snowballed into my relationship with NACDA. Mike and I became very good friends. I became a sponsor of NACDA. Um, and I was working at University of Minnesota, um, running the Final Four in 1992. Well, in October of 91, um, Mike calls and says, I need you to come to Cleveland. So I come to Cleveland, and he offers me the job. He says, now I want you to start right away. I said, Mike, I got to find a four to run. I can't, I'm not, let's talk about this afterwards. And, so he allowed me to do the Final Four, but I really could, he said, I could not hire you unless you had that experience at the University of Minnesota as an assistant AD, which made perfect sense because I knew a lot of the people. I invited them to all of our functions, and Mike was really wonderful. And after the final four was over, June 1 of 1992, I came to work for NACDA, and it was just everything Mike promised. He gave me. He said, he says, I want you to run the business. He says, I want you to be the external guy. I want you to build a business. And he just let me go. And one of his famous lines was, I know you like famous quotes. And so the first year we were together, we have our midwinter meetings in Marco Island, which is where you've been a number of times. And he had a meeting with the board, and he said, yeah, well, I just want to let you know Bob's doing a real good job. I do have a concern though. He said, I gave Bob an unlimited budget, and he's exceeded it. So it was just a continuation of a beautiful relationship.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your time at NACDA and about the organization, National Association of Collegiate Directors of Athletics. It's really everybody in college sports but the coaches and the trainers. I mean, it literally is. It's now sports information. It's, you know, um, development. It's marketing. It's, compliance. I mean, it's a little bit of everything. But a lot of people that are just casual college fans don't understand what it is and how it's influenced the industry so much. Talk a little bit about
Well,
that.
that's really by design, Rick. I mean, Mike's, the trait of a real good leader, in my opinion, is probably his or her most important trait is being humble. And Mike was never one to be in the limelight, and that's the same philosophy that he taught me, and that now Pat Manick has. When I was hired, the board said, Bob, we want you to build the association. And I'm talking about old school names like, Bill Byrne, Jim Jones, Mike Lou, John Toner, Jack Langle. And I said, well, what does that mean? And we said, we want you to build a professional association for every business unit that works for the AD. So when I started, it was just NACDA. Then we hired Pat Manick, and Pat and I went on a buying spree, if you will. When together, Pat and I built 18 associations underneath that umbrella, and we did it under the guise of education, Rick. Our job was to find things, find educational components to make the athletics director's job easier. And it's really blossomed into a phenomenal organization, again, under the radar. But we get the largest trade show in the industry. We'll have you know, 6,500 people at our convention every year. We'll have 13,000 hotel room nights. I mean, it's really become a force in the industry. And it's just one of those things that, was that commercial. We make it better. We made the industry better because of the people that have learned from one another under the NACDA umbrella.
Well, what I always liked about what Mike did was, and what you carried on afterwards, even maybe even more so, was bringing back the legends, the retired athletic directors, and having them be mentors to other people, having them make presentations, or even more importantly, I'd go to Marco Island and sit in the
Yeah.
lobby with these guys and just have a cup of coffee and pick their brains, because you would learn so much. And I love that, because I felt like some of the legends in intercollegiate athletics, we've lost some of that right now at a time that we really need a lot of wisdom. A lot of wisdom has left the building or left the earth, but that was very important to Mike, and it was very important to you. And I love the fact that you always paid such great respect. Coach Dooley and I were so close, and every time I would come to Marco or come to the convention, I knew I was going to get a lunch or a
Right.
dinner with Coach Dooley. And then I could say, Coach, I got here's my 20 questions I've been working on since we had our last dinner. Talk about that, about using and utilizing that talent
Yeah,
pool.
well, in order to know where you're going, you got to remember where you came from. And NACDA's always, if you came up through the food chain, became an officer, became a president, we provide funding for them to come to our convention, for them to come to midwinter meetings. And it's just so important, like you said, it's one thing to be in a meeting, but it's another thing just to be in a room and absolve some of that knowledge. Because at the end of the day, things haven't changed. People still do business with people. And when you have those retired past presidents, those phenomenal athletics directors, whether it's Gene Smith, Kevin White, Dan Guerrero, Randy Spetman, they come back and they're just there, and just to be in the room to interact with them, and just at a cocktail party or sitting by the pool, it's just so important, and just reiterates how important it is to be humble and keep yourself grounded in this crazy world of social media and all these things going on in the industry. I think it's sometimes good to sit back and listen to a Jim Livengood, listen to a Dave Hart, because they've been there and they've been in the chair. And even though times are real crazy right now, at the end of the day, the pressure that ADs are facing today was exactly the same as they were facing 20 years ago.
Yeah, every era has had issues. I think it's almost arrogant to think that the era that you're in it is the most special or the one that's the most challenging. I mean, I do remind everybody that the reason the NCAA was created to begin with was the President of the United States, Teddy Roosevelt, was tired of football players getting killed in the flying wedge, and said, we got to fix this. And so, as bad as things may sound like today, people aren't getting
Right.
killed on the football field. So there were other challenges, but today is really challenging. And I think what NACDA does today maybe is more valuable than ever before, because you've got to have a dialogue. How do you navigate transfer portal? How do you navigate NIL? How are you navigating all of the legality that's coming out? Right now, the big fear of any athletic department is, am I going to be sued
Right.
for some decision that we've made? And it's a very, very challenging time, but you have to solve problems. And you can sit in the corner and say it's the worst of times, that doesn't get you anywhere. You got to solve things because we do know this about college athletics. It's been the greatest liberator, especially for minority kids. Generational changes, a free college education, a chance to learn and change your life and change the direction of your whole family.
Yeah, no doubt. And, you can't do any of what you just said without sitting across the table and communicating. And that's what NACDA does. NACDA brings the people together. And, I don't care what day and age it is, it's 2026 right now, but, you got to get people around the table and talk about the problems. At the end of the day, it's the same basic premise. We're here to support those 18-year-old boys and girls that come into college. And when they leave 3 or 4 or 5 years later, they walk out as men and women who have had a phenomenal experience, both athletically and educationally, and who now are going to leave our institution and make a positive impact on the world. That hasn't changed. Even with all the rhetoric out there, young people say, Bob, I want to get in college athletics, but I'm not sure. I just reiterate what I just said. Our job is to take care of those young boys and girls, watch them mature over the duration they're on campus, and then let them out into the world to make a positive impact. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about.
Well, now you've got a different role, you've got what do your grandkids call you? What's your name?
I am Pop, and Mary is Mimi, and we are celebrating our 45th wedding anniversary on Saturday. So we're very excited about that. And the thing about it is thinking about your career like you do. I mean, and I know that nothing happens without having that solid spouse foundation behind you, because you traveled the world, I traveled, and nothing would have happened looking back upon everything now. Yeah, it was nice to be in all those places, but what was better was knowing, Rick, that when you called home at night, the kids were taken care of, whether Mary's out throwing baseballs with Bobby, hitting volleyballs with Amy. Charlotte was doing the same thing. At the end of the day, that's where it's all about.
I'd remind people all the time that behind every successful man is a very surprised
No
mother-in-law.
doubt.
And, and we both outkicked our
Oh,
coverage in so many
so
ways.
so many
Uh,
ways, and
yeah.
you're right. Both my mother-in-law and father-in-law are there. I know they're looking down, and they're saying, "I don't know how you did it, Bob. We're proud of you." I know that's what they're saying.
Well, talk about the time you get to spend with your grandkids now, because I know every time I try to get a hold of you, you got one of them somewhere.
Well,
Talk
yeah,
about it.
we have a 10-year-old Nora, and she's into volleyball and soccer and that new thing they call lacrosse. I don't understand that much about that, but she's into that. And then we have 2 6-year-olds. Charlotte's our theater girl. She's going to be on Broadway someday. Patrick, I don't know. He might win the Nobel Peace Prize in space exploration or something. He's funnier than heck. And then the baby, Benny, he's 4 years old, and he is just a chip off the old block. He's just a real ball buster, if you will, and always looking to get into trouble and just nothing but fun. But we're very blessed being able to chase them around, and again, having them live so close. There's just nothing like it. There's always something to do. We have 4 different spreadsheets coming at us every month about who's doing what to whom, and so we're looking forward to that. And every day is just a blessing. Every day is a bonus. Tomorrow's not guaranteed, so live every day to your fullest.
Well, I was blessed too. My dad was an only child that came late in their marriage. I mean, we called him the second coming because I think they had been married 14 or 15 years before my dad came along and didn't think they could have children. But my grandparents lived across the street from
Mhm.
us. And so I had that
Right.
experience with my grandfather growing up, and it's so valuable. And I've got 3 grandboys, 2 of them live in England, so I don't get the daily kind of time with them. We try to, go places 2 or 3 times a year and meet and have experiences. We'll have a house in France, in July. But my son's little boy, Levin, I get him every Friday.
Uh-huh.
He gets out of preschool every Friday, 12:30, and that's our Friday field trip, and that's our time to do that, and then he spends the night on Friday nights, and it's a joy, and I know you're really enjoying the time that you have with yours because no matter how good a father we hoped we were gone a
Right,
lot.
right,
We I mean, part of it, I feel like I missed out on some things that I just decided round 2, I didn't wanna miss out
right.
on, and I think that's the same thing with you.
Yeah, and you always try to do something unique. One of the things that the kids love doing is we got to go fishing. I take them all fishing. And we have a little pond close to the house. And one thing I learned the very first time I went, if you take four little ones fishing, you better be catching. Because if you're not catching, they're going to be in the water before you know it. So that's kind of one of the many fun things we do, you know. And again, it's just we're just very blessed that you know they love being with us and that we have this special time. Because again, Mary and I as a team, you know, we did the same thing you did. We would come back to Chicago. We'd come back to the lake house in Wisconsin, you know, for 1 or 2 weeks a year. But to be able to do it, you know, every week is really special and one of the things that we do not take for granted.
Yeah, but I know y'all still get to travel now some. Y'all like to travel, you go to Florida some, you go see friends and stuff. What's left on your bucket list? Where do you wanna go? What are some of the things that you and Mary still wanna do?
Well, one of the things we're to check one thing off. You know, when I met Mary, she worked for Princess Cruises in Chicago. So we both had that travel background, if you will. So one of the big things that she's always wanted to do, her grandmother, who she was very close to, Gaga, her favorite place on earth was Lake Louise. So this September, we're going to go up and spend some time in the Canadian Rockies, and she's going to get to experience Lake Louise, which is what her grandmother really enjoyed. We want to do a river cruise. We want to get to Greece. I grew up with a lot of Greeks, and I just love the culture and love the food and just love their way of life. So we want to get to Greece. We've talked about maybe getting Africa and go petting a lion or two. So you know, we're open for experiences, and but the first thing is trying to check that Lake Louise off the bucket list, and then we'll see where life takes us.
Yeah, that's a beautiful part of the world. A lot of the I guess it was the railroad companies in Canada built these magnificent lodges to try to get people to go on the
Right.
railroads to those places like the Lake Louise Lodge and Banff and some of those places, and so spectacular scenery with really great historic hotels and, really neat area. It'll be fun. So, well, listen, you've been really influential to me. You've been a great friend, great colleague. You've influenced so many others in intercollegiate athletics. But the cool news about our generation is we're not done.
No,
We're still doing stuff. We're still trying to influence people where we can. The most important influence I think you're having right now are with those
no
grandkids.
doubt.
Because again, our situations were similar. Your grandparents were part of your life. My grandparents were part of my
Right.
life. My mother's father died when she was 2,
Oh boy.
and she was the youngest of 3, and when she married my dad, my grandmother sold her house, and she went and lived 1/3 of the year with each of the 3 girls.
Oh,
So, I had 1/3 of the year, I had my mother's mom in the house with
how
us,
great is that?
and my dad's parents across the
Yeah.
street with us. So, it's so valuable to pass on that kind of wisdom and just it's a different being a parent. It's okay, but being a grandparent's the
No doubt,
best.
no doubt. And
'Cause
the
you
one thing I just try to instill influence today, again, if they ask for it, because people have to ask for your input. You just can't be one of those know-it-all old guys. But the
right.
one thing I try to instill in the sitting ADs and the young administrators today is take some time for yourself. Take some time for your family because you know what? Without your health, without your strong family values, nothing else matters. And so, yeah, work might be busy and you want to do this and you want to build that and you want to retain this coach and do this and that. But at the end of the day, it's all about the relationship you have with your spouse, with your family, and maintain that health. Because without health, as you know, as we're getting older, life without health is not a life you want to live. So you got to maintain that
Right.
and keep that as you go forward.
Yeah, and I think part of that is still staying
Right.
contemporary. I know that while you're not in the business, you're still reading, you're still looking, you're still having conversations because you got to stay contemporary to add value. You can bring wisdom, but you got to bring wisdom within the context
No
of
doubt.
what are the issues that they're dealing with today. And I think that's a big part of it. Well, again, you've been one of the great leaders in college athletics. I love what you're doing now in retirement. You and Mary are very special people. Have been always been special to Charlotte and me, and I can't thank you enough for being my guest
Well,
today on
well, thank you
Shaboom.
so much, and let's get the girls together and have a nice bottle of Pinot and talk about old times.
Well, we got to do that, and I got to get back to Cleveland and back to Johnny's to eat those wonderful stuffed banana peppers. That is still, Bob, the best dish I've ever had in my life. And I'm not sure that anything's ever going to top Johnny's veal stuffed peppers with that marinara
I
sauce.
love it.
And it's all because of
Well,
you. So thank you for
thank you,
that.
my friend. It's been an honor to be with you today.
It's now time for the boom. Where are all the statesmen? When I was a kid, I could count dozens of statesmen in America on both sides of the aisle, Democrats, Republicans, independents, great men and women that were truly statesmen. One of the great statesmen, in my opinion, was our former mayor here in Charleston. Joe Riley became the mayor of Charleston in his 30s. He was a young lawyer, and then he served 10 four-year terms. He served for 40 years as the mayor. He was a Democrat in largely a Republican-red state, and yet he got along with everybody. And yet he was such a great influence. He took this town that really was a Navy town, and then the Navy Yard got closed, and he made it a great destination place for tourism. One of the last of the great statesmen. I remember so many great stories of people like Tip O'Neill, who was a liberal Democrat, Catholic, Irishman, who had a great affection and relationship with Ronald Reagan, who was a conservative and a Presbyterian and a Republican, and yet they had great commonalities. When Reagan got shot, the first guy to get to the hospital to see him was Tip O'Neill. And you know what he did? He said, "I'm going to pray for you right here, right now." I don't see many Democrats praying for Republicans these days. I don't see any Republicans praying for Democrats these days. It's a problem, and it needs to stop. We need more statesmen, and that's the boom for today. It's time to get back on the road with Rick. Who would you think would be the most influential chef in America today? That's an interesting question, but one might say he's actually a chef from someplace else. Jose Andres from Spain. He owns or has licensed over 30 restaurants, but is now really best known for being the creator of the World Central Kitchen. The World Central Kitchen is that kitchen that when we have disasters all over the world, they come sweeping in, and they come in to feed people when people need to be fed after hurricanes or disasters. You may remember he lost 4 of his members of the World Central Kitchen when they were blown up in Gaza, when they were when they were trying to feed people during the war in Gaza. The guy's clearly an influencer. He's clearly a statesman. He's clearly a giver. He's clearly trading success for significance. One of his restaurants, Jaleo, started as a food truck in Washington, D.C., but it's now a full bricks and mortar place, both in D.C. and the one that I like is in Disney Springs in Orlando. It's part of the Disney family. Great sandwiches, amazing gazpacho, amazing gazpacho. Like I'll go in and I'll order a bowl of the gazpacho, and then I'll order a second bowl of gazpacho. That's how good it is. And they make amazing sangria. So there's nothing better than, get you, a great Spanish sandwich, get you one or two bowls of gazpacho, and get you several pitchers of sangria. It's a trip to Spain and Orlando on the road with Rick. It's now time to take a trip down memory lane. I have had so many people who have influenced me in my life, and one of them was the great Bob Vecchione. We lost Bob a few years ago. Bob was a Jewish fella from New York who came south to go to school at the University of Alabama, and he married a Southern girl, and he became a newspaper man, a newspaper reporter, and later he started his own PR firm, Conan Wolf, that grew to be one of the largest PR firms in the world. And I had the opportunity to go work at Conan Wolf. I had been working at Georgia Tech, and my boss, Norman Airy, had left Georgia Tech. It's an interesting story. He came into my office at Tech and said, I'm going to have breakfast with Bob Vecchione tomorrow. I think he's going to offer me a job, but I'm going to ask him for this salary and a car allowance and a housing allowance and all that stuff, because I don't think he really wanted to leave Georgia Tech. Well, he came into the office later the next day, and he looked at me glumly, and I said, well, did he turn down your offer? And he goes, his offer was better than my offer. And he went over there. We had been there about 3 weeks and realized he had to do a lot of work, and he knew the guy that would do the work. That would be me. So he hired me to come over to Conan Wolf, and it was one of the greatest things that ever happened to my life. I met my lifetime pal and later business partners, Lance Hill and Lisa Murray, at Conan Wolf. But I want to tell you a wonderful story about the influence and the trip down memory lane. The best story I can tell you about Bob Vecchione. He's on his way to go down to see the governor, Joe Frank Harris. We're doing a project. I have nothing to do with the project, okay? It's called Quality Basic Education. It was a program about elevating education in the state of Georgia. And Conan Wolf was doing the PR for it. But Bob liked me. He called me Coach all the time. He said, Coach, come on, ride down to the Capitol with me. And so we're riding down to the Capitol, and I'm assuming that Bob is going to tell me a little bit about this project before we get to the governor's office, because I know nothing about this project. But no. In classic Bob Vecchione fashion, he wants to talk about the good-looking girls in the office. Okay, so we're talking about the girls in the office all the way down to the governor's mansion. We stopped off at an artist studio to pick up a board. It's a white board that has the old-fashioned children's block, and it has QBE on it, and it's green and blue colored. Okay, QBE. Here's the board. He mentions nothing to me. We park at the governor's office at the Capitol. We're walking down the hall, and Bob turns to me and says, Rick, let me do all the talking. Well, no shit, Sherlock. I know nothing about this. We're about to meet the governor and his head of education, Barbara Morgan, and I'm going to let Bob do all the talking. Famous last words. So we get into, and Bob's talking all about the program and blah, 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 and then he shows the logo. And the governor, Joe Frank Harris, says, I love the logo. Why did you choose those colors? And Bob turns to me and goes, Rick, really? I take a deep breath and I say, well, Governor, green is the color of growth. We want to have great growth for our students in the state of Georgia. And blue is the color of the sky. The sky's the limit in where education can go in Georgia. And we didn't want to use Georgia or Georgia Tech colors to be polarizing anybody. And the governor goes, that's great. We leave the office. We're heading back down the hall, and Cone pats me on the back and goes, way to go, Coach. You made that shit up. That summed up Bob Vecchione. That's a trip down memory lane. It's now time for the last word. I'm a big John Maxwell fan, and this is what John says. Leadership is influence, nothing more. nothing less. We hope you'll join us again next week on Shaboom, and that you will share with others how to listen to Shaboom, because we'd like to grow our audience. We'll see you next time.